Hello everyone, welcome to Level Change channel. My name is Claudio Fonseca. I'm a real world pilot. I fly the 777 and today we are going to talk about the performance calculations that we have available on the Simbrief. I want to show you what this new feature can do, and we are also going to compare the results. That's a really nice part. We are going to compare the results from the Simbrief with the 777 from PMDG, still in the version for the prepared 3D. And I'm also going to compare this with real world data that I have in my company provided tablet. Of course, I cannot show you that application, but I can tell you the numbers that I have on the screen here on my right side. Okay, so let's start first talking about the Simbrief. Okay, so here we go. This is the Simbrief page. So you can go simbrief.com. And let's start from the beginning. When you go to simbrief.com, you will see something like this. If you are on the dispatch page, you can note here that I have all my details. And here on the left side, you have performance and tools. Okay, it's much easier if you file a flight plan. If you edit a new flight, then everything will be populated from your flight. But you can do from the zero. You don't really have to have a flight plan or calculate something. You can come direct here, select the airplane that you want. Let's say if you want the 320 Neo, you select here the 320 Neo and so on. Okay, so in this case, today I'm going to fly the 777 freighter from Luxembourg to Sao Paulo. Okay, so when I select the 777 freighter, the only variant that I have from Simbrief is the default one. Okay, so I'm going to the part. I'm going to set up again Echo Lima Lima X-ray, which is Luxembourg, and you are going to see when you pop up something. Even if I pop up, let's say Frankfurt, you are going to see that it changes to one runway that may be in use at this time. Okay, so let's select Echo Lima Lima X-ray, which is Luxembourg, and it's selecting runway 24. It's selecting runway 24 because already populate here down below the wind. Wind is 277 at 12 knots, which means this is runway 24. Okay, if it was going to be runway 06, we'll have a tailwind. Okay, so runway 24 seems correct. If you want to shorten your runway length, that means it says that runway 24 has 4,200 meters, but let's say you are not taking off from the beginning of the runway, you are taking off from a certain intersection, so you can take the meters of the runway that is going to be behind you, or the feet. It depends. You need to select meters or feet. I prefer to do with meters. So let's say that the taxiway that you are taking off today is 400 feet ahead of the runway, of the beginning of the runway. So you just input here 400 meters and the distance will be recalculated. Okay, so in that case will be 4,002 meters minus 400 meters was going to be 3,602 meters eventually. Okay, so but today to compare the results, we are going to take off from the full length, so shorten runway 0 meters in this case. Then you have the option to select between meters and feet for the length of the runway, and also for the weight you can select between kilograms and pounds. I'm using 2 kilograms. Okay, next step is to input your takeoff weight. This is required. Okay, I just checked the flight plan that I'm going to use today from Luxembourg to Sao Paulo in real life. And so far we are taking off with something around 336 tons. Okay, so I'm going to input here 336. Have in mind that for the weight, we are not perfect to the kilogram or to the pound. Okay, we want actually to have a number here that is slightly higher than our takeoff weight. Okay, why? Because let's say that my real weight is 335,452. Okay, so if I select 335,400, I'm illegal because I'm 52 kilos heavier than the performance that was calculated. Okay, so I need to be conservative with the weight, and usually on the 777, as 50 kilos, as even 1 ton doesn't change much, we tend to round it up to the next 1,000. Okay, so today something like 335.4. So I'm going to calculate with 336. Of course, it will depend on how much fuel we are going to take. If we increase our fuel above the minimum fuel required, we have to increase this takeoff weight and so on. So it's something like this. On the triple, we always take it to the next 1,000 or to the next 500. Okay. One thing that some regulators, they allow you to start your takeoff row with 200 kilos more than the performance was calculated itself, or even more than the maximum takeoff weight, because you burn this on the runway. But this is a little bit weird for me, and when I see the regulation, most of them, they talk about the brake release, which means the point that you align with the runway, you release your brakes, and now you start your takeoff by adding power. So that is the weight that is calculated for your performance and all the regulations. Okay, so that's why you want to be a little bit conservative on this number. Then we have the flap setting, and this is usually company policy. So when the company talks to Boeing, or to the company that is developing the application itself, let's say that Simbrief is developing for my virtual airline this application. So I'm going to tell Simbrief what is optimum flap for me. Okay, so for some companies, optimum flap is the lowest flap setting, because most probably it is going to give for this flight the lowest fuel consumption. For some companies, the optimum flap setting will be the flap setting that will maximize your derate, your temperature, your derate temperature, so you can save on the engine costs and so on. Okay, so I don't really know what is the policy for the Simbrief, okay, but it's really nice that we can keep it on optimum as we do on my company, and it's giving me pretty much the same results. So I think this is related to the maximum assumed temperature that you can have. I will give you one example. For the 777, we have three options for takeoff flaps: 5, 15, and 20. Okay, 5, 15, and 20. So if you select, let's say, if you select 5, maybe this will give you a full takeoff with a assumed temperature of 34 degrees. Okay, but maybe if you select flaps 15, your assumed temperature will be 47. Then in my company, they will prefer to go flaps 15 because it gives you increased the rated temperature, increase assumed temperature for your takeoff. That will save the engine life, the engine maintenance costs, and they prefer saving these than the fuel. Some companies are the opposite, so basically keep that in optimum. It will give you the best answer, at least for your flight sim and in real world, based on the company procedures. Okay, the same thing for the thrust setting. You can leave it in optimum. Here on the 777 freighter, we have takeoff, takeoff 1, and takeoff 2. My company has an option for a takeoff bump that is not still not here as an option for the Simbrief, so it's something that I'm missing here. But usually we keep optimum. The only difference is that on my company software, the takeoff bump will also be considered in this optimum calculation. So basically, the application is going to do. In my company, it tries to calculate with takeoff 2. If it doesn't work, it goes to takeoff 1. If it doesn't work, it goes to takeoff. And then if it doesn't work, it goes to takeoff bump. Okay. Here on the Simbrief, I don't know what is optimum for the application itself. I realize, for example, if you have the PMDG, the 737 PMDG for the Microsoft Flight Simulator, the optimum thrust will be the one that is going to give you, how can I say this? Let me tell you something. They will start with takeoff, which is the maximum thrust that you can have, apart from takeoff bump, because takeoff bump is also not available on the PMDG as a performance calculation for the MSFS. Okay, so they will start with takeoff, and then they will see how much they can assume the temperature. If they can assume the highest temperature and they still have margin, then it goes to takeoff 1 and it does the same thing. If they can go takeoff 1 and assume the highest temperature and they still have margin for this takeoff, then they go takeoff 2, which is the lowest setting, and then they will go up to the maximum temperature they can assume. Okay, so let's say they are in takeoff 1. Sorry, they are in takeoff, which is the first calculation that the application does, and it doesn't reach the maximum assumed temperature for that takeoff rating. It's going to be that rating with that assumed temperature and so on. Okay, so leave thrust setting in optimal is a good option for you. Then we have the bleed setting. The bleed setting basically means air conditioning on or air conditioning off. On the 777 and on the 73, this also means that if you select it off, you can use your APU for the air conditioning. Okay, so when it comes to bleed settings, if you select auto, basically you have packs on with engine bleeds on. If you select bleeds off, that means you can have two different calculations or two different types of takeoff when you select here bleed setting as off. One is to have the APU on for takeoff and use the APU bleed for your air conditioning packs. And the other option is to take off with your APU off as well, and then you will have to, and you will keep the bleeds off, so basically no air conditioning. Okay, so for bleed setting, if you have APU to the air conditioning or no air conditioning, you select the bleeds off. If you have air conditioning from the engines, which is usually the case, you keep this in out. Okay, anti-ice setting for the 777 here we have the option for off, which means you will have no bleed from your engines to the anti-ice system. Okay, the other option is a engine, so you will have bleed from your engine from your engine only to the engine anti-ice, and the last step is engine and wing, where you have bleed from your engine to the engine anti-ice and also to the wing anti-ice. Okay, and the auto option is basically I think on the anti-ice settings, it means if the temperature goes below 10 is going to be on, if temperature is above 10 is going to be off. It also depends if you have a dry or wet runway. So my recommendation here is not to leave auto, is to tell the system what you as a pilot are going to do. Okay, let's say that the temperature is 5, but there is no visible moisture, there is no rain, the runway is not wet. So even though you have a low temperature, that's not going to create any type of ice because you don't have humidity. So you keep this as off. Okay, and on the 777, we never take off with wing anti-ice on. However, you may need to use wing anti-ice after takeoff. So if that is the case and you are using engine, you select engine plus wing, otherwise you select only engine. I will not keep this in auto, okay? So I prefer in this case as the temperature here in Luxembourg right now is around 17 degrees, I will keep this as off, okay? Then you go to the wind, temperature, pressure, and surface condition, and there is an option here to populate weather. So this option is going to take the matter from Luxembourg, as you can see. Let me see if it's showing to you. Yeah, it's showing to you. So you have here 280 at 12, Cavoque 17 degrees 1017. So this one is going to go to your data here. So 28 at 12, it's basically 277 at 12. Okay, this is the more accurate wind, not only based on the meter but on the actual wind that we have in Luxembourg. I don't know where this information comes from, but you can check always. That is very similar to the 80s that you have. Okay, also temperature 17 and QNH 1017. Surface condition, it says dry because it doesn't mention any rain here or snow or something like that. Okay, have in mind that if you have a recent rain, maybe the runway will still be wet, but this situation cannot select as surface condition wet because right now is not raining. Okay, so make sure that if you have a recent rain, even though the meter doesn't show rain, you change this to wet because the runway is still wet. Okay, so today there is no rain forecasted here in Luxembourg, so we are going to keep runway dry. Okay, another thing, once you calculate all of this, I'm going to explain you about flex assumed temperature and improved climb calculations, but I just want to calculate like this for now because I want to show you something. When we come here on the weather info, when you select 277 at 12, okay, that means you have 9 knots headwind and 8 knots crosswind. Okay, so what is important for us is the amount of headwind that the performance computation is taking into account. Okay, so let's say that you calculate this performance and then you go for your takeoff, and then you have a wind by the tower 270 at 7 knots. So even though you still have pretty much the same direction or even a more aligned with the runway, let's say the wind is 240 at 7 knots, you will never have this headwind component of 9 knots if you have a wind of maximum 7 knots. Okay, so then your takeoff performance is invalid. Okay, you need to have at least your headwind, the amount of headwind that you choose for takeoff. Okay, I know when we calculate a headwind of 9 knots, all the tables, they are only considering half of this wind. So that means 4.5 knots. Okay, the weather information says 9 knots, but every time that we input a headwind, the performance calculations here on the Simbrief, on the tables on your real airplane, on your Microsoft Flight Sim performance, anywhere, it's going to take half of this headwind. Okay, so let's say that you are taking off 240 at 7. You still have 7 knots, so this is more than 4.5. This is more than half of this headwind. But the intention of the calculation with half of the headwind is not to compensate for these cases. It's to compensate for different wind components that you have along the runway. Okay, maybe you are going to use the wind from the end of the runway and in the beginning of the runway is different, or vice versa. Or maybe you are going to use the wind in the middle of the runway and so on, because as you can see here in in Luxembourg, we have a 4,000 meters runway. Okay, so in this case, the wind in the beginning of the takeoff row and at the end of the runway, they are completely different, or they may be completely different. Okay, so that's why all the performance calculation, they take this into account. Okay, so it depends on the company policy, but try to be conservative and try to calculate your performance with a wind that is not going to give you less headwind or more tailwind than you calculate on your performance. for you to be conservative and be on the safe side, okay? So in this case, like today, 277 at 12, that gives me a headwind of 9 knots, okay? I can think about reducing these 12 knots to 6 knots or even to 5 knots to check how much I'm going to get. Okay, 277 at 5, we calculate again, and now it's calculating with a headwind of 4 knots. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that in 45 minutes that is our takeoff, okay, because usually we do these calculations like around 45 minutes before takeoff, 30 minutes before takeoff. So I know the wind is not going to decrease from 12 knots to 2 knots, so I'm very happy with 5 knots. Okay, have in mind that is very useful to calculate without winds if you have enough performance to do so, okay? So because this doesn't change much your assumed temperature, okay? So even if we populate the situation like this and we calculate, you're going to see that the maximum assumed temperature is 35, and if you use wind 0, wind 0, and you calculate, it goes to 34, so it only change 1 degree, okay? And we were talking about 12 knots or a headwind component of 9 knots, okay? So try to be a little bit conservative on this wind if you can, of course, if you can, okay? Same thing for the temperature. Let's say now it's 17, but it's noon, 5 minutes to noon right now, and I'm going to take off in 45 minutes, which is around 1 p.m. And we know that the temperature usually rises until 2 p.m. 2:30 p.m. usually in most of the places around the world is like this. The temperature increases with the sun and reaches the maximum around 2 p.m. Okay, so in this case, I can calculate maybe with 19 degrees because maybe the temperature will increase another 2 degrees or so. It depends where you are. If you are in the middle of the desert, you can even increase this temperature even higher because the temperature is going to increase faster and so on. So try to be conservative, okay? In this case, I'm going to populate with real weather and change only the wind to 0. I'm going to keep this temperature and the local pressure, which is 1017. Okay, we already talked about surface condition. The next 2 steps that we have is flex or assumed temperature. Flex is for Airbus, assumed temperature is for Boeing, but they do the same thing. Basically, instead of taking off with maximum power that you can have from that engine or from the rating that you select on the engine, is going to take off with less thrust because this less thrust is enough for you to take off, and this is going to save the engine, to save cost with maintenance because you are not taking your engine to the limit. You are using less thrust, so this engine is running in a better situation. It's just like your car. If you take your car and you push the throttle all the way from the beginning until you have to brake to stop, you will notice that the engines will run in a higher rotation per minute. You're going to burn more fuel and so on, a lot of things, okay? So this is how we do for the aviation. We can select disable, so in that case you are going to use maximum thrust, or you can enable, and in this case you are going to have some assumed temperature that is going to reduce the thrust that you are going to take off to something that you still can take off, but you don't have to use maximum thrust, okay? The next step is improved climb calculations. You also have the option to disable and the option to enable. Basically, what improved climb does is, if you have a long runway, like in this case today here in Luxembourg, where we have a 4,000 meters runway, the performance calculation can use this improved climb to keep you longer on the runway, to increase your speeds while you are on the ground, and then once you rotate, this increased speed, increased energy that you have is going to help you in the beginning of your takeoff, and you will be able to clear the obstacles easier. Okay, so basically you are staying on the runway for a longer time, you are rotating with a higher speed, and this gives the this gives the airplane more energy for the initial part of your climb. Okay, of course, if you have a short runway, you cannot stay on the runway for a long time because of the runway length, and then these improved climb calculations are not going to be considered even if you keep this enabled. Okay, so my recommendation is keep this always enabled, because if the runway is long enough for the performance to calculate with this improved climb, it's going to do. Okay, if I click here on the question mark, it's going to say, at hot or high airports, the limiting factor can sometimes be the second segment climb gradient, which means is the climb rate between you select the gear up and flap retraction, which must meet or exceed a certain value by regulation. However, if there is a lot of extra runway available, the climb limit can be slightly increased by intentionally accelerating to a faster than necessary takeoff speeds before rotating. Enable this option may result in V-speeds that are slightly higher than normal for the selected flap setting, which can increase maximum takeoff weight and or maximum flex temperature when climb limited. Okay, so you need to have these two situations. You need to have this longer runway for you to accelerate, and the only thing that is going to improve is your climb limit weight once you are out of the ground. Okay, so if you are not sure, if you don't really understand this, keep enable and just follow the results that you are going to have. Okay, so once I calculate this one more time, I have here my information. This is the registration for this airplane that I selected. This is the aircraft type, is a Boeing 777 freighter, and this is the engine rating. Okay, have one thing in mind. If you select this 777 freighter and you change the details of this airplane, which Simbrief you can do on the Simbrief, like on here on saved airframes. You can take the basic information from the 777 freighter and change a couple of details, for example, for the registration, for the maximum weights, for the cargo weight or whatever, and on that information on the saved airframe, you can also change the engine type. But when you change the engine type there, it's only going to change the numbers that you see here, and is not going to change the actual performance. For example, the company that I fly in real world, we don't have these engines. We have the same GE90, but our thrust is not 110 pounds, it's 115. Okay, so if I come here to save the airframes and I change this to G90 115BL, which is the engine that we have, it's only going to change the number here, but it doesn't change actually the takeoff computation, the performance calculation, because every time you select the 777 freighter, you do not have other engine on the Simbrief than this engine. Okay, I'm going to show you, for example, if you select here the 777-300ER, then you have the default, and you are going to see, let me see if I put the same weight here, and if I calculate, you can see here that then the engine already changed to 115BL, okay? Because on the 777-300, you will have on the Simbrief always this engine, and on the 777 freighter, you will have on the Simbrief always the 110. Okay, so I do not recommend you to change engine type on your saved airframes, because it doesn't really change the performance here. So that's the first limitation of Simbrief, okay, which is you will have a certain performance calculation only for the default engine that they have on the system. Okay, I would like to see another option here, not only for the thrust setting, but also for the engine type. It can even be down here, like flex assumed temperature, improved calculations, and engine type, or something like this that will give you the option to change this, okay? Then everything else as we selected. Takeoff weight 336 is here. Bleed setting, we select auto, which means bleeds on. Anti-ice setting is off, which we selected. And then the flap setting. If I hard selected something, was going to be the same. Let's say I want to take off with flaps 15, I'll calculate, and this gives me the flap setting for 15. But if I keep it optimum, then here I discover which one is the optimum for my takeoff, which is in this case flaps 5, okay? Thrust setting is a durated takeoff, which means is a takeoff thrust with a assumed temperature, a durated temperature of, in this case, 34 degrees. And then we have the speeds for V1, 173, VR, 180, and V2, 182. If I come here to the right side, I'm going to see that this is the V1, 173, where I'm going to reach on the runway. This is the VR 180, and this is the V2 182, and it's telling me that I'm going to reach 182 here, almost at the end of the runway, but this is already 35 feet above ground elevation, which is the requirement for the V2, okay? Also on the left side, you have two options, which means at V1 is your latest reject point, which is almost 3,000 meters from the beginning of the runway. And if you start your reject here at 2,928 meters, you will stop at 3,879 meters. That gives you a margin of 123. So if you take 123 plus the stop distance, you are going to be back with your takeoff run available, in this case of 4,002 meters. Note that takeoff distance available for this runway, takeoff run available, accelerate stop distance available, and landing distance available for this runway, they are all the same, 4,002 meters. In real world, this may not be the case. And let me check here when I come to... Yeah, in this case, they are all the same in Luxembourg, even in the real world, okay? The run available is the same as the distance available, is the same as the accelerate stop, and is the same as landing distance for this runway. What can change this distance are clearways, are stopways, and so on that we do not have here in Luxembourg based on this configuration, okay? So now that we know more or less what is our takeoff performance, there are a couple of more things that we can take into account. And it's really nice that it says takeoff limits, okay? We calculate with 336, but with the actual conditions that we have, wind 0, temperature 17, QNH 1017, dry runway, okay? On this specific runway in Luxembourg runway 24, full length, maximum takeoff weight will be 347,815. And this is maximum takeoff weight, okay? So basically what you see here is that you can go up to maximum takeoff weight with these conditions, which is 347,815, okay? And you will not have any problem. Sometimes you may not have enough runway to take off at maximum takeoff weight if you had to, okay? Then you're going to see here what is the limit for your takeoff. And in this case, it copies again the assumed temperature that we have here of 34 degrees, okay? One more time, it takes the weather information. Wind, we use 0, which means 0 headwind, 0 crosswind, temperature 17, altimeter 1017, and the surface was dry. And one more time, only to realize what is the runway information that you have. You are departing from Luxembourg, which is 1,234,000 feet elevation. Runway is 24. It was not shortened, so shortened by 0 meters. So the actual length is 4,002 meters, and the slope which they call here gradient, is minus 0.42%, which means on runway 24 you are taking off downhill. Okay, so the elevation on runway on threshold 24 is higher than the elevation on runway 06, and this is very important for your performance calculation because, of course, if you are accelerating and taking off and even stopping downhill, this change than if you were doing it uphill. 0.42% is not much, but is calculated as well by real-world performance applications and even by this Simbrief, okay? And this is almost the same information that I have here on the real world. At least in my company, they say that the slope is minus 0.41, okay? So which basically is nothing, okay? It's just most probably rounding up and down, so you have this gradient, okay? So now that we know, I'm going to play a little bit with this information here, okay? Let's say that we do not have this takeoff weight, and our takeoff weight is 310, okay? So when I calculate with 310, it didn't change much, okay? Because I want to show you something, 300 maybe, yes. When I calculate with 300, it gives me a message here. Its speeds increase to improve climb limit, which means in this case, these improved climb calculations took effect, okay? So if you do not have this information, keeping improved climb calculations enable or disable is not going to change anything, okay? Let me show you. Once again, 336, and you calculate, okay? So you have 5, 34, 73, 80, and 82. If you select disable and you calculate, you will have the same 5, 34, 73, 80, and 82, okay? But when we do with 300, okay, and I calculate, I have 5, 45, 67, 70, and 74. Oh, sorry, this was disable, okay? And if I calculate with enable, you are going to see that this changes, okay? So you have 1 degree higher on the assumed temperature, and the speeds are now 69, 74, and 77. If I take disable one more time, it goes to 67, 70, and 74, okay? And if I do even lower ones, okay, and I enable, okay, once again, is calculating with improved climb, is giving me a higher assumed temperature with higher speeds. And if I disable this and I calculate, it's going to give me different assumed temperatures with different speeds. In this case, it gives me a higher assumed temperature because it changed from takeoff 1 to takeoff. Okay, so let's go to enable again. Okay, let's go to enable and we calculate. Note that if we calculate with improved climb, it even goes to DTO 2 and 30 degrees. But if I take to disable, okay, it's going to go to 51 degrees assumed temperature, but on the takeoff setting. Okay, so takeoff with 51 is more thrust than takeoff 2 with 30, okay? It's not only because of assumed temperature. What mainly changes, of course, is your thrust setting, okay? So keep this enable and follow whatever is here. You will be fine, okay? Just to show you when you have this improved climb enable and this takes into effect, you are going to see this pop up here in green, speeds increase to improved climb limit. If you do not have the formatted, if you have the text version, there will be this message at the end, speed increase to improved climb limit, okay? And basically you have all the information just in text, okay? Instead of having this beautiful layout from Simbrief, okay? Another thing that I can do, let's say that we were with 336, which is our standard takeoff weight, or let's say what I'm expecting to take off today. But let's say I don't want an assumed temperature, so you can come here and you can disable the assumed temperature and you can calculate, okay? So then if I calculate, it's going to take me to no assumed temperature, okay? So with takeoff, flaps 5, you have speeds 170, 179, and 182. Slightly different, just slightly different than if you were using 34 degrees of assumed temperature, okay? Of course, if you use assumed temperature, what the performance calculation does is to try to maximize the use of the runway. So you have a stop margin of 123 meters. If you think this is not enough for you, or you are not comfortable with only 123, you can play with these numbers and even taking these to disable. So now if you calculate without an assumed temperature, you are going to see that your stop margin increased to 639 meters, which is a lot, okay? But have in mind that you are taking off with a higher thrust. That's why you have a higher margin. So you are taking off with a higher thrust. So you are going to reach your V1, VR, and V2 much before than the end of the runway, but you are using more thrust. So you are using more your engine, okay? So now what I want to do is to enable this, use the same calculations that we had in the beginning, and I want to compare this with the Prepare 3D, with the 777 on Prepare 3D from PMDG. Okay, so let me show you now simulator. There we go. Here you have the sim. Okay, I'm on the runway in Luxembourg, runway 04. Okay, and I'm going to show you the performance calculation from the PMDG. So basically, I already did. I select Luxembourg runway 24, no intersection. So here you cannot use an intersection, but you can do the same way as you were doing on the Simbrief. You can come here to NOTAMs, okay? And then you can short this runway from the runway start in the amount of meters that you want, okay? So this information here is the same of shortening the runway there on the Simbrief, okay? Here you have more options. You can short it from the beginning or you can short it from the end if you have a construction or something. It's more complex than Simbrief, and this is how it is in real life, because in real life it matters if it's in the beginning, if it's at the end, especially because if it's at the beginning, you are still going to take off at the end of the runway, and that will impact on your obstacles that you have after takeoff. If you are shortening at the end, then that means you are going to take off shorter on the runway, and your obstacles after takeoff, they will be more distant, okay? So this changes the takeoff calculation and so on. But on the Simbrief, you don't have the option to start to shorten from the end or from the beginning. You always do from runway start, okay? Here in PMDG, you have better options. But anyway, we are using today full length. I use wind zero, temperature already increased, so I'm going to select 17 on the temperature and the QNH 1017. We are using here, there's no option to use optimum flap, okay? So as in Simbrief, it gave me the option with takeoff. I'm going to select takeoff. Assumed temperature, I want the maximum assumed temperature that is available. So flaps, I keep optimum. Packs, I keep auto. Okay. And for anti-ice, I keep engine and wing anti-ice auto or anti-ice off. That is the same for today. 336 tons, and I calculate, and you are going to see here that we have flaps 5, 1000, select temperature of 33, speed 72, 80, and 82. If I go to, or if you go back, you are going to see that the difference in the select temperature from here, from the PMDG airplane to the Simbrief, on the select temperature was only 1 degree. Here we have 33 on the sorry, on the Simbrief we had 34, so only 1 degree difference, and the speeds they were 173, 180, and 182. Instead of 172, it was 173, so only 1 knot, and this is on the V1, okay? And VR and V2, they are all the same. Okay, so that means this application from Simbrief and the application from PMDG, they use the same database. This difference in 1 degree, 1 knot is just the rounding up of numbers, the way that PMDG uses to round up these numbers and the way that the Simbrief uses to round up these numbers. Okay, so I just proved to you here that this information is really nice. One thing to consider, this application that you are seeing right now is the application that we have in the real airplane. My company have slight differences on the way that you select the ATM thrust, on the option that you can select rating optimum instead of having to select a specific one, but it's pretty much this in the real airplane, okay? With PMDG now, when it comes to the new Microsoft Flight Simulator, we already know that this is not going to be the performance calculator there, because they are going to use the same version, or I assume that they are going to use the same version of the tablet for the 737, and that have a different approach on the performance calculation, which will basically calculate the same thing as this one, the same thing as the Simbrief, and the same thing as the real airplane, just with different layouts and different rounding numbers and options, but basically all the numbers, all that you need for your uh, performance itself and for your flight sim experience, they will be the same. Okay, I would rather have this one, as this is the real airplane, as I'm used to use this. But yeah, I'm expecting something like the 737 also for the 777. And if you are used to the Simbrief, you can always use the Simbrief, and the numbers, they are quite good. What will be really nice is to have on the Microsoft Flight Simulator the option to see that the Simbrief performance calculation on the tablet itself. Okay, so then we were going to use the Simbrief interface on the PMDG tablet. That will be the best for this moment in the flight sim community, I would say. Okay, and how are these numbers related to a real world calculation? Okay, so I'm going to show, or I'm going to tell you these numbers. I'm just changing here the temperature to 17 degrees as well. And one thing that I have to tell you is that on the airplane that I'm flying, my engines, they are not rated at 110,000 pounds of thrust like it is the 777 freighter P3D version from PMDG, and which is the Simbrief database as well. The engines that I use in real world in my company, the company that I work for uses, are the 115. So I have 5,000 pound of thrust more on the real airplane that I fly. So based on this, I can tell you that the results, they are quite similar. Speed V1 172, it matches PMDG and is different from Simbrief by 1 knot, which is nothing. VR 180 matches PMDG, matches Simbrief, and V2 182 matches Simbrief, matches PMDG. Okay. The only difference that I have is the select temperature, that instead of 33 in PMDG, 34 in Simbrief, I have on the real airplane 37, which makes sense because my airplane is 5 pounds more capable. The engines, they are 5 pounds of thrust more capable. So as the maximum thrust is higher on the engines that I fly in real life, to have the same performance, the select temperature needs to be higher. Okay, so this difference of 3 or 4 knots from my real calculation is just to give this the airplane the same amount of thrust, because the thrust that you need to take this airplane from the ground is the same. Okay, why? Because if you have different engines, all the rest in the airplane is the same, so you will still need 180 knots as rotation speed to take off this 777. It doesn't matter which engine you are using, because the wings, they are the same, so they have to generate the same lift. It doesn't matter the engines that you are using. Okay, so I can tell you, at least the numbers on prepared 3D version, they are very nice. And one thing, they are designed for the airplane that you selected. Okay, so in this case, I selected the 777 freighter here on prepared 3D. So the performance computation that it comes with this airframe, specific airframe, is the one that is what you are simulating. Okay, so if you select the 777-200 with a lower engine rating, the performance in the system here itself is going to be to that engine, so you don't have to think about it. Okay, so from Simbrief, that's one thing that you have to consider. You will always have to understand what is the default engine for that airplane, and see if the default engine for that airplane on Simbrief matches the airplane that you have on your sim. Okay, and to do this, I want to show you something. Okay, let's go back to Simbrief. Okay, and I want to explain this to you one more time. Okay, so for example, if I come here and I select the 737-800, okay, so there are a couple of options here. The default or for the PMDG Microsoft Flight Simulator, let's say I select the default one, okay, and I'm going to put 65 tons for takeoff, okay, just to calculate something. Okay, notice here that these calculations were based on this engine, the CFM56 7B with 26,000 pounds of thrust. Okay, so if you are simulating with one airplane that is capable of only 24,000 pounds of thrust, these numbers, they are going to be wrong. Okay, and also, if you want to take off these engines with the bump that it takes you to 27 pounds of thrust, you don't have this option. Okay, because here you have takeoff 26k, takeoff 1 24k, and takeoff 2 22k. You do not have takeoff bump with 27. Okay, so have in mind that if you are using this airplane, 26,000 pounds of thrust, but your maximum simulated engine is 24, you have to come here and change it to 24 or 22 if you have the option. You cannot keep in the optimum, okay? Because it may calculate based on the 26k, okay? And this is for any airplane, okay? If you have an Airbus, let's say an Airbus 320, okay? This is the Airbus 320. And I'm going to use the same takeoff weight, 65,000. Okay, so this is the CFM 56 5B4 Papa. Okay, I don't know about Airbus airplanes. I don't know what this 5B4 Papa means. Okay, if this is 24, I think it's something like 24,000 pounds of thrust, but I'm not sure. Okay, and if you have the 320 Neo, and you do the same, I will do the same number here, you will see that the engines now, they are the LEAP one Alpha 26, which I think is 26,000 pounds of thrust, okay? But have in mind that it doesn't matter. If I go to the 777 and I go to the 200 ER, okay? And I go to 336 again, 33600, okay? And I calculate, okay? I have the GE90 with 94,000 pounds of thrust, and I cannot change this, okay? I cannot change. So you can even see that the maximum weight for this airplane is 297. So it already changed to 297. And I cannot change this. If I take the 200 ER and I one more time 336 and I calculate this one, it also stops me on 297. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let's take the long range 33600, which is the one that we have in my company. So if we do with this one, yeah, the LR it can go to 347, 452. But one more time, the engines that I have is 110,000 pounds of thrust. Okay. If I come to my simulator and I select any other engine than this one, these numbers, they are not valid. That's why I still like the PMDG performance calculation, because you will not have to worry about the engine thrust, as the takeoff performance here on your EFB, it will match your current airplane, okay? And something that you will have to take care on Simbrief, okay? And for example, if I go to the 777-300ER, which is the airplane that PMDG is going to launch first for the Microsoft Flight Simulator, this is not a problem, because the 300ER only has one engine version, which is the 115. Okay, so there will be no problem, and you can use that with your new 777 from PMDG for the Microsoft Flight Simulator. Okay, but have in mind, once PMDG starts launching the freighter or the 200s, and they all have different engines, and even with the same engine, with the E90, they have different maximum rated thrust for takeoff. You will need to select this one. And as of now, we do not have this option on the Simbrief, so you need to be careful if you are flying the same airplane with the correct engine type here, okay? One more time. The freighter here that I used, it matches the airplane that I'm using on the sim, which is 110,000 pounds of thrust, but is slightly different from the one that I have in real world, which we use 115. Okay, so this is everything that I have for takeoff. Okay, now let's consider a couple of things for landing. And I will keep the same airplane, the 777 freighter, okay? So let's go for the landing calculations. I'm going to select the 777 freighter. I'm going to land today in Guarulhos. Runway there, so far it's showing runway 28 right because of the wind, but wind 090 at 9. This should be runway 10 right, okay? 10 right. I want to see the runway in meters. And today, I am planned to land there with 242. So let's take here 242,000. Okay. Flap, you can use 30, 25, or 20. 20 only for no normal. So normal conditions 30 or 25. Let's take 30, for example. Braking setting. Usually we don't have the option for maximum on our calculations. We have maximum, sorry, for optimum. We have maximum manual, we have maximum auto and brake 4, 3, 2, and 1. On the real airplane, we also have an option for all. So it calculates for all the brakes and shows me the distance for each brake. Reverse credit, yes or no? Usually we don't take it. VREF additive is on the 777. We have here the option for none. Auto thrust on, which is the 5 knots. Half of headwind plus gust, if you're going to use this auto throttle off, or 1/3 of headwind plus gust. I don't know why I would use that. Okay, so basically I keep on, and I can even select a value. Okay, so if it's very bumpy, FCTM on the 777 recommends you to use +10. Okay, so you can even type the number that you want. So in this case, we are going to use 5. Once again, that wind 090 at 9, temperature 14 degrees, QNH is 1024, and it says that the runway is wet, because if we take the airport information here, it doesn't show rain, but it's taking wet, I think, because of this low visibility, maybe, which makes not much sense for me. Okay, so I will calculate with dry. Okay, and one more time, 092 at 9, we can use 0 or something similar. Okay, so I'm going to calculate like this. So what we have here, same information for the airplane, the weight, the flap setting that we selected, and it gave me auto brake 4. Okay, this brake 4 with no credit, VREF of 144, and then with +5, the V approach will be 149. So with a brake 4, I'm stopping in 4,042 meters, but there is a margin applied to this, which takes me to 2,614 meters, and the available runway is 3,000 meters. Okay, so with these 2,614 meters, okay, it gives me a margin of 386, which is the difference between the available and the factor distance. Okay, we land limits. We have sufficient runway to land like this. Yes. What is the maximum weight? Is 268.16, which is maximum landing weight, and that's here we have the weather information and the runway information again. Note that for runway 10 right, they are using for takeoff, if they were going to use for takeoff, distance available of 3,300 meters, run available of 3,000 meters, for accelerate and stop 3,060 meters, and for landing distance available 3,000 meters. So we are considering always for landing the landing distance available. Okay, so this is basically what we do. Note that if I take my brake to 1 and I calculate, is going to see maximum runway weight exceeded. Okay, so we do not have sufficient runway to land with auto brake 1. It says landing not authorized. Okay, if I select the brake 2, I'm going to have the same thing. If I select the brake 3, I'm expecting to have the same thing. Okay, because what Optimum does is to give you the first auto brake option that you have, which is in this case auto brake 4. If you select maximum auto, it's going to even increase your margin, and if you go to maximum manual, it increases even more your distance. Okay. Another thing that you can do, you can play with the reverses if you have reverses or not. So let's say optimum and with reverses, it gives me the option to land with auto brake 3. So basically, I'm stopping in 2,372 meters. If we include the margin for this calculation, is going to be 2,995 meters, which gives me a margin of only 5 meters for the total runway. So basically, in normal situation, I'm stopping here, but with the margin that is required for the landing calculations, I only have 5 meters. Okay, so that comes and that brings the next step, which is I'm not going to talk about calculation method right now. I'm going to talk about calculation reference. Okay, so calculation reference, we have here factor distance and actual distance. And when you have the factor distance, okay, it says This controls whether the actual or factor landing distance will be used when checking if the runway length is sufficient and selecting the optimal brake settings. Okay, basically what this does is the factor distance increase your landing distance by 15%. Okay, so you take 2372 plus 15%, you will get 2995, and by regulation you need to have this margin for you to do your approach and landing in normal conditions. Okay, I'm talking about normal conditions. Okay, so that's why it's selected with no reverses, even though this is a little bit confusing, because in real world, if you have a dry runway and you are using brake 3 and 4, and it doesn't matter how much reverse you use, you're going to stop at the same place because of the auto brake settings. But nevertheless, this is good for the flight sim because it actually reflects how the flight sim works. So if you use no credit and you calculate like this, it's telling you that you need auto brake 4 because of the margin that you need to have, and you need to have enough runway for the factor distance, which is the actual distance plus 15%. Okay, but if you don't want this, you can remove, and you can always calculate with actual distance, and then once you calculate with the actual distance, it even gives you the auto brake 2. Okay, so the auto brake 2, in this case, it's telling you with no reverser, auto brake 2, you are going to stop in 2,716 meters, and the runway is 3,000 meters. So you have a margin of 284, but this is the real number. You don't have that 15%. If you were adding 15% to 2,716, you have 3,390 meters, which is right here because it's beyond your distance available of 3,000 meters. So what I do recommend, okay, what is my recommendation and what I do in real world? I have to calculate with the factor distance, okay? And in this case, because we are quite heavy, I would use reverses for this landing. So I will use flaps 30, reverse, and this was going to calculate to me with brake 3 and reverse. Okay, so brake 3. So I know I land in 2,372 meters. Even if I miss by 15%, I still land within the runway. And that what I'm going to take is the airport information to see how much runway I can vacate, I can use. So how do I show you this to you? Let me show you something. Give me some time because I'm opening Navigraph. Okay, and I'm going to the airport. And yes, so let me see. Here we go. Let me. Okay, so I want to change to Navigraph. Okay, now you have Navigraph. Okay, this is the information for Guarulhos. So it says on landing. Okay, it says on landing the distance from the threshold to the rapid exit taxiways. Okay, so on runway 10 to Bravo Bravo is 1840 meters, and for Charlie Charlie, which is the one that I want to vacate, is 2450. Okay, 2450. So I want to vacate this runway at taxiway Charlie Charlie, and this was designed for me to be there at 50 knots. Okay, so if we go to the airport, basically what I want to do, I want to land on runway 10 right. Let me change this, 10 right. I want to land here, and vacate at Charlie Charlie. Okay, so to vacate at Charlie Charlie, okay, it tells me that I have 2,450 meters. Okay, so I can vacate on Charlie Charlie. So with this number in mind, I go back to my calculation, performance calculation, and now I can see that I'm going to land in 2,372. So this is 20. This is just before Charlie Charlie. So this is the auto brake that I want to use. Okay. If I use actual distance and I take brake 2, it's going to show 2,622. So I know I'm going to go beyond taxiway Charlie Charlie, and then I have to vacate at the end, which is not ideal for this airport. So basically, I use the factor distance and optimum to know which one is my lowest brake setting that I can use for regulation, which in this case is auto brake 3. Then I go for the actual distance and I calculate one more time. The actual distance even gives me option with reverser to use auto brake 1, but then I'm vacating at the end, so I don't want. I try brake 2. I calculate again, and it shows me 2,622, which I still don't want. I want to vacate at 2,450. So I select brake 3, and then I go 2,372. So this is the optimum one because this is going to take me really close to taxiway Charlie Charlie. Okay, so basically I'm going to stop around here. So basically around 60 knots I can disengage my auto brake, and then I have enough margin just to stall my reverses, reach 50 knots, and starting vacating left here on Charlie Charlie. Okay, so that's why I wanted to show you this from Navigraph, so you can do this in any airport. Okay, so one more time. Calculation reference, factor distance for you to understand which is the max or the minimum brake setting that you need for that specific situation, including the 15% margin. And then I know brake 3 is the one that I need. So is it better brake 3 or brake 4? Okay, then you go to actual distance, and in this case, I select brake 4, and let's see. Oh, I can stop in 2,000 meters. But if I stop in 2,000 meters, okay, one more time in Navigraph, if I stop in how much? One more time, in 2,029 meters, I am missing taxiway Bravo Bravo by 200 meters. Okay, so I'm missing taxiway Bravo by 200 meters more or less, and I'm still far away from taxiway Charlie Charlie. So I will be between Bravo Bravo and Charlie Charlie. So this is not ideal. So the better option for me today is, yes, brake 3 to get really close to Charlie Charlie, and then I can vacate there at 50 knots. Okay, I hope you understand this. So how I use the Simbrief calculation reference for factor distance to know my minimum brake setting, and then the actual distance to select which brake, because maybe like here it says, oh, okay, you can do with brakes optimum, you can do with brakes 3, but maybe brakes 3 is not good enough, and I'm going to go beyond the taxiway that I want to vacate. So maybe if I select brake 4, I will be closer to the one that I want to vacate, and that's how you calculate. Okay, all of these, okay, based in the in-flight method, which is for your actual landing. Okay, so calculation method, in-flight method for your actual landing. Okay, here it says that the dispatch method apply 67% dry runway or 92% wet runway margin to the actual landing distance. Okay, and that's for you to start your flight. Okay, so let's say that you go to dispatch method, you are going to the same airport, and you go dispatch method and you calculate. Okay, so it will always calculate with maximum auto to tell me where I'm going to stop with in dry runway in 60. This is what is where I'm going to stop, and then they increase that margin, okay, to tell me if I could land with maximum landing weight. Okay, let me show you something. If I go to Sierra Bravo Sierra Papa, which is another airport in Sao Paulo, okay, I know the 777 does not go there because this is a really short runway, okay? And even the pavement of the runway cannot support the 777, okay? But let's say I want to try to go to Sao Paulo, and then I calculate here, you are going to see that maximum runway weight is exceeded, okay? So you cannot land in Sao Paulo, okay? Which is only 1,650 feet meters. So you cannot dispatch a flight to that airport. That's why you have the dispatch method here, okay? So let's go back to Guarulhos, okay? We'll go back to runway 10 right, wind 0, and the dispatch method, and we take a wet runway now, so we calculate. It also gives me margin of 3 meters. So even in Guarulhos, with the maximum landing weight of 260,000 kilograms, if the runway is wet with no wind, I can land on runway 10. Let's say that I'm predicting a wind of -5 and I calculate this. Okay, it says headwind -5. Yeah, this is the magnetic wind. So I still can land there. What's the maximum landing weight? 268.16. Okay, so I still can land there. São Paulo is not a big deal. Okay, most of the airports, actually, what I'm doing here is what the companies they do before opening a flight to a destination or to try to use an airport as an alternate. They are going to calculate if that airplane can land there, and if there is any problem, they may come up with some solutions telling me, okay, in Sao Paulo you cannot land with tailwind, so every time you have um, um, you need to land a headwind or so on, okay? But this is only for dispatch. That's why it says dispatch method here, okay? So for your real calculation, you go in-flight method and you use factor distance, and to know where you're going to stop, actual distance. The good thing about the factor distance is that once you calculate, it still gives you both the actual and the factor one, okay? So you have this information so you can see where you are going to stop, okay? So use in-flight method for your in-flight landing calculations and the dispatch method for your dispatch calculations. Let me think about one airport that we have limitations on the dispatch method. Maybe Quito, Ecuador. Ecuador. Okay, dispatch method. Let's calculate. Still doable with the current conditions that we have there. For both runways, okay. Quito, not a big deal then. But in some situations, if we increase temperature to 30, let's say in Quito with 30 degrees, still doable. I'm a little bit confused about these numbers coming down when I increase the temperature here. I think something that the PMDG has to, sorry, not PMDG, Simbrief has to improve. Because if I take to my real OPT here and I'm going to landing dispatch, I'm going to do the same calculations with U Sierra, Ecuador, Quebec Mike for the runway 36. I'm going to use wind 0. Okay, so wind 0, temperature of 13, and QNH 1026. Yeah, the QNH is a little bit high, so it's helping. 1026, flaps 30, air conditioning off. Don't even have this option here, and no thrust reverser. Let's see, no thrust reverser. Okay, so, and dry runway, I'm going to calculate. Yes, it says 26815, which is the same number that we have here by 1 kilo. Let's say if I go to 30, still not a big deal, but then if I go to 30 on my real airplane here, and it's dry, sorry. So if I go to 30 and dry, it says that the maximum that I can take is 257. Okay, so on the real airplane, it already reduces our maximum landing weight by 3 tons. Okay, so this is not very accurate here from Simbrief. Okay, let me see if I take wet. Yeah, 3 tons. 3 tons. Wet or dry, it reduces to 3 tons. And yeah, so here on the Simbrief, we have some different numbers that I'm used in real world. Okay, that's why I went to check here for this dispatch method. So the dispatch method is not working as expected as in real life. Okay, that's the only thing that's not working as expected, but maybe because this is using information that they could gather from the simulator itself. Okay, so I'm not going to complain about it. It's something that you need to be careful. Okay, and basically you don't really use this um, in um, in real world calculations. Usually this is done by the engineer department of the company, okay? Because usually if you cannot land with your maximum landing weight, the company will have done this calculation before and it will tell you somehow in your company manuals or in the airport information that you have for that specific airport. Look, this airport with these conditions, maximum landing weight that you can take is this one, so you will be informed about it. Okay, so basically takeoff performance calculations, it's working really fine. Okay, just have in mind that you need to have the same engine. Okay, landing performance, it's working really good for the in-flight method, for the factor distance and for the actual distance. Okay, both of them are worked really fine, and the dispatch method is a little bit off, at least in the 777. This is the first time I tried the dispatch method and I could notice that from the real world information that I have, at some airports, it should reduce uh, your landing capability a little bit, like in this case in Quito by 3 tons or something like that, and it didn't do. Okay, so ignore the dispatch method in flight. That's what you need for your normal flights. Okay, so guys, I hope you enjoy. I hope you understood a little bit more of the uh, performance calculations by the Simbrief. I know it's almost 1.5 hours that I'm talking about it, but I try to cover as much as I can. If you didn't understand a few topics, I'm pretty sure you still can fly on your sim. Okay, couple of things that I talked about here, they are a little bit more advanced than for regular flight sim users. But this is to show that if you are a real pilot or studying to be a real pilot, you can think about those considerations even with the Simbrief or the 73 or sorry or the 777 from PMDG, at least on the prepared 3D version. Okay, so if we go landing here we also have, look, we are on the dispatch. Let's see what it tells us for Quito. Sierra Echo, Quebec Mike, runway 36, dry. We select keyboard with 0, temperature was 13, and QNH 1026, flaps 30, anti-ice auto, and everything on or off, it doesn't change. Okay, so we calculate, and it's giving us 260,185, which is correct. And then if we change this to 30, it should reduce a little, no, not show dispatch, dry, and if we calculate, you see, it goes down to 258. In my real airplane, in my real calculation, it goes down to 257. Okay, so very similar. We are talking of 257. I will open again here. I was going to stop the video, but 267.2, and here we have 258.3, which means they are off by 1 ton, which is not much for a 777, but as you can notice, the landing dispatch really decrease if you have a high altitude airport, short runway, and high temperature, and this combination. Okay, it doesn't mean that you cannot land there. You can always go to en route, and you are going to have now the standard situation. Okay, I can even try break 3. I think it's not, and I can try 260, which is our maximum landing weight, 260. And I can calculate, and you're going to see exceeds landing climb limit weight. Yep, that's the problem for the climb. So 260 is too much with these conditions. But then if I go to that number that they give me, which is 258, then I can land. Yeah, so you see, to avoid having a number, for example, let's say that I'm going there with 260 tons, okay? So I'm going there, I'm flying there with 260 tons, and I click to calculate, and they say, no, you cannot land here because you are heavier than expected or heavier than permitted. So for the pilots not to discover this in flight, okay, that's why we have the dispatch, and then this dispatch information is going to tell me what is the maximum weight that I can use for this airport. Okay, so that's why we have this, and that's why the company calculates this before you have a flight to those places. Okay, but Simbrief is not doing this. Okay, so landing dispatch on the PMDG 777 for Prepare 3D is working fine. Okay, so to go there one more time, if you go on performance, it's going to show you usually the takeoff. Okay, so you can press show landing, and then usually it takes landing dispatch, and if you don't want the landing dispatch, you can click show en route, then it shows you and takes you to the en route landing. And if you want to go back to dispatch, you click show dispatch, and you have the information for the dispatch. Okay, so for this, I didn't change. Oh, sorry guys, I didn't change the screen for you. My bad, my bad. I was talking a lot and I didn't change the screen for you, so I'm going to do it again. Okay, so one more time. Performance. Usually it comes in the takeoff. Okay, so from takeoff you can click here on the left side to go show landing. Okay, once you go show landing, usually it's going to show landing dispatch, and you can do landing en route, the same thing as Simbrief. Okay, so let's say on the dispatch, if I use dry runway in Quito with the actual wind, with the actual temperature, if it's 13 degrees, and I calculate, it shows me that I can do maximum landing weight, 268.15, okay? But if the temperature is 30, it shows me that I can go maximum 258, okay? So, if I go en route with 30 degrees, runway dry, and I want to use, it doesn't matter the brake, even maximum auto, okay? And I want to land with 260, and I'm going to calculate, it shows that exceeds the landing climb limit weight. So basically, if I didn't calculate my landing dispatch before the flight and I'm going to Quito, I'm going to arrive there with 260 tons. I'm going to calculate my landing performance, and then the system will tell me, you cannot land here. You are too heavy. So for this not to happen, you need to know what is your landing dispatch. So in this case, for Quito with these conditions, is 258.3. So now if I'm en route and dry runway, and I want to land with 258 tons, good enough. I can calculate and I have the information here. I can even change now my auto brake or whatever, because this is not related to the auto brake, okay? This is related to the performance that you can achieve for your go around and so on. So I can even use maybe even auto brake 2 in Quito, and it's going to be more than enough. Even auto brake 1 is going to be more than enough with 258 tons. But I cannot go more than 258 in this case because of the temperature. Otherwise, I cannot go around, okay? So 258 here. And if I change one more time to 13, which is the current one, it shows maximum landing weight, okay? So this is what my real OPT is showing me, and this is what the PMDG application is showing. But if you go on the Simbrief, the landing dispatch is a little bit off, okay? So do not use landing dispatch there, okay? That's my only recommendation, not to use the Simbrief so far for the landing dispatch, okay? And I think now you understood why we would be using landing dispatch, because we want to know before landing if we can make the landing on that runway with the weight that we are planning, okay? It doesn't mean that with 30 degrees we cannot go to Quito. Yes, we can go to Quito, but our maximum landing weight needs to be 258, okay? If we are landing there with 240, 210, 190, 170, we still go there, okay? But this is a very specific situation, and that's why most of the engineers from the company, they calculate all these variables so they can tell the pilots in the manuals, look, maximum temperature for you to land in Quito with maximum landing weight is 27 degrees. So anytime is above 27, you need to be careful. You need to go to your landing dispatch and calculate to see how much you can take there. Okay, and of course, if you are light, no problem. You are going to complete your landing with no issues. Okay, so now we did an hour and 30 minutes. I hope you liked this video, and I see you soon. Bye bye.